what's the use of two strong legs if you only run away? And what use is the finest voice when you've nothing good to say? What good is strength and muscle if you only push and shove? And what's the use of two good ears when you can't hear those you love? It's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got. Yeah, it's not just what you're born with, it's what you choose to bear. And it's not how big your share is, but how much you can share. And it's not the fights you dreamed of, but those you really fought. It's not what you've been given, it's what you do with what you've got.
Welcome back to Seeds of Revolution. I'm very excited today because we have three incredible activists here from UVic Law, Hard Law, Harm Reduction and Decriminalization. Harm Reduction and Decriminalization. Hard Law is a student group at University of Victoria Law School. And with us today are Sophie and Jesse and Sky, three incredible students and activists, to tell us all about it. So welcome to Seeds of Revolution, Sophie and Jesse and Sky.
Thanks, Joel.
So maybe you can start off by talking about what Hard Law is, what your sort of mission statement is, and how the three of you got involved with it in the first place.
Sure, I can tell you a little bit more about Hard Law itself. We were started in 2021 as a group of law students who recognized gaps in our education around drug policy and the roles of law in the ongoing contaminated drug crisis. There were students who wanted a space to talk openly and honestly about the impacts of laws and policies on the lives of people who use drugs. So we made one. Our name comes from two areas of drug policy that we are especially passionate about, which is harm reduction and decriminalization. Sophie, you want to tell us more about why you joined Hard Law, maybe?
Sure. So I joined Hard Law because I went to a concert or a show in Victoria before my first year of law school, and I met one of the law students who started Hard Law, and they told me, you should join Hard Law, and I didn't really know what it was. But I went to the first meeting, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is great, because law school is a weird place, and it felt like somewhere that made sense.
What was it about Hard Law that made sense that wasn't making as much sense compared to the rest of law school?
I think that a lot of what we learn in law school is super divorced from the reality of life for people who are affected by the systems that we're learning about. And it seemed like even with other clubs and stuff, it just felt like there wasn't necessarily as much that community mindset. And right away, like the students from the year above very much emphasized, this is like, we're not making things happen here. We're here to support the community and learn from the community and support each other, which I thought was really lovely to have in that space.
Oh. I have many follow-up questions, but first I want to hear from Sky. Sky, why did you get involved with Hard Law?
Hello. Yeah, I think I see Hard Law as like a meeting space of people in the law school who care very deeply about the people that are affected by the criminal legal system and are there to help, and it pulls people in. I, before law school, worked at a supportive housing organization out in Halifax, and that was my first encounter with, I guess not with addiction or with people who use drugs, but I guess the people who are continuously brought into the legal system and who are just heavily policed and criminalized. And it really opened my eyes, and really inspired me and taught me so much. And then when I came to UVic and when I was doing research about UVic, I saw that this group existed. And then, yeah, just went to the first meeting and felt really inspired and was around people who were doing, I guess, like the legal work that I wanted to be doing. And that meant a lot. And it's continued to mean a lot. And I think hard law is bigger than the people who started it. And it's a cool, like, ongoing rotation of students who come into the law school with a lot of love in their hearts and then put that love into the work, which is awesome.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about what it is that's so special about hard law compared to the more conventional law school experience. Because, I mean, the four of us, having gone to law school, me teaching at the law school, we're sort of intimately familiar with what the reality is. But I think a lot of listeners, when they picture what goes on in law school, they picture some maybe very noble pursuit, where you learn how to fight against injustice and how to fight for the small person against the rich and the powerful. And the four of us understand that that's not an experience that really reflects the reality of law school. So I'm hoping you could talk about the difference between the reality of law school and what you had in mind when you went into it, and specifically what you found through hard law that you haven't found through other classes or other clubs at the law school.
For people who can't see, we're all nodding our heads right now. Because I think we really do agree with that. In terms of law school can be a little bit of an alienating experience when you go into it thinking that you're going to use law to be able to help people. I think that I had definitely like a romanticized idea of what law school was going to look like. That hasn't really been my experience. But hard law has really been like a pocket of hope, honestly, in a space that I find kind of difficult to be in sometimes. And I think that honestly, one of the main reasons for that is really just like the organizational structure of hard law, which is a very non-hierarchical organizational structure.
Maybe anarchist, if you will.
Very much so, I would say. We really work together as a group. We make decisions as a group. We support each other. We are understanding of one another. And I think that everybody really just tries their best. And we've been able to do some really, really incredible things while feeling supported and feeling like we're able to work together. And everybody really brings something different to it, which I think is really awesome. I don't know. Did you want to add?
Yeah, I was listening to an audiobook last week or the week before, Peace and Good Order by Harold Johnson. And yeah, good book. And he was talking about law school and describing it as a gatekeeper rather than a bridge to justice or to the law. And just how so many barriers and gates are put up around it, and even when you're in it, and makes things more challenging than it ought to be. And even the law itself, and I feel like the law is put on this pedestal, and it's nobilized and very convoluted, but it's like not rocket science, and it's more simple than it is made to seem for people who don't have a legal education. And I think it's so convoluted because, like when people read cases or something, like people who don't have a legal background, they're like, this doesn't make sense. And they assume that it's because they don't have the legal background or legal knowledge, but that's not it at all. It just it doesn't make sense. And even when you do have like the ability to translate it into like the real world, it's still, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that goes around. But I think, I think also like hard law works hard to translate that. And I think like last year we did some, I see it as translations, but like stuff that's happening, like legal work that's happening in the community, like bringing it into the school and explaining it in simple terms, just so that that information can be like disseminated out, and so that the pedestal that it's put on can be brought down to reality.
So I definitely didn't know anything about the law before going into law school. I did my undergrad in ecology and environmental biology and then realized I didn't want to do that. And then saw UVic law and thought it looked cool and maybe I'd do environmental law. But I think the thing about law school and pretty much any type of law that I realized really quickly is that the system itself, our legal system, is so fundamentally oppressive that any good you're trying to do within that system, not any good, but a lot of it, like environmental law, for example, you're fighting one small little part to hopefully maybe get an injunction, which is like a stop on something that's being done, or to get money for the hurt that's been done to you. And what I really appreciate about hard law, I think, is that we get to also learn about the people who are working outside of the system. Like, for example, the Drug Users Liberation Front, DULF, who do incredible work, like people who, are working and using the system in a way that maybe it's not meant to be used.
That's really, I have a follow-up question I keep wanting to get to, which is what do you do as members of hard law? But what you just said just triggered every neuron in my brain. What do you mean not in a way that's not meant to be used? I think I know what you mean, but I want to be sure, and I find that fascinating.
I think that a really disheartening thing as someone who didn't know anything about the law and then came into law school is realizing that the law is all kinds of law, because it's basically one system of law at the end of the day, is set up to work for some people and work against other people. And I mean, that maybe sounds really obvious, but it's so true, so scarily true in a way that I think people can even hope it's not true before coming to law school. That even when you're able to do good within the system, it sometimes feels like you're just redeeming a system that should be seen so clearly as irredeemable, if that makes sense.
That makes a ton of sense. That was a really eloquent answer. And at the risk of being voyeuristic, do you remember, was there a moment where your disillusion really set in, where you realized, oh, the law is not for and about what and who I thought it was, that the law is actually for something very different, and it's for a very different group of people? Like, was there a moment when you said, oh shit, this is a different universe than the one that I thought I was entering?
I can't remember maybe a specific moment, but I think it happened really quickly. And I think, if anything, it would be having learned what we learned up until maybe like the second half of law school, already feeling that way, and then applying that, like what you learn by actually talking to people who are affected by it, and like going to this DULF judicial review and meeting the people who are being criminalized for using drugs and all sorts of other things, obviously. But yeah, I think at a certain point, it was just building up until it's like you want to have defenses against the reality, even in your own mind. And at a certain point, it's just too much. And even though like those things you're using to protect yourself from the reality just can't withstand the reality.
Yeah. And I feel like that's definitely like the bubble gets burst. And there's grief that comes with that, or okay, now we need to like re-figure out how we're going to do good. But I think there's also a lot of like power in like moving through that realization and continuing to gain the legal education, just so that there are like people who are able to see things a bit more clearly, or at least the way we're talking about them, which I think is clearly. And like having people within the fight who are able to like have one foot in and one foot out. Just, yeah. Yeah.
Jesse, any thoughts on the disconnect between what you expected before going to law school and what you encountered when you actually got there, and how that maybe influenced your decision to join Hard Law and get active in that community?
I mean, I definitely agree with everything that both of these two have been saying. I think that going into law school, I didn't have very high expectations for, like how I was going to feel, in terms of like whether or not I was going to feel that it was like a positive thing, the law. But I do think that it's similar to what Sophie was saying. It's hard to have your reality, like, even if you didn't think that things were going to be very good, it's hard to realize just how fucked up the system is, and how it really, really is built against certain people, and that there's really not very many resources for those people to do anything about that. Yeah, I think it's just hard watching the little guy get screwed over and over and over again. And the way that the system tries to pretend that it isn't built that way and that it is a fair system and that like justice is a real thing. I think it's just it's scary to see that, and it's hard to have conversations with people about it, because I think that nobody really wants like the foundations of their society to be broken the way that they are.
I just want to really quickly clarify, because I feel like this seemed very obvious to me, but it's important to say. When we say works for some people and against others, the people that it works for are people with money and property, and very often, obviously, white people. I just felt like it needed to be said.
Yeah, and in class we're taught how the law ought to be applied, but not how it is, at least in majority of the classes. And people move through law school and they might not take the classes where you hear something else, and they're going out and they are moving through the world with a hell of a ton of power, thinking that it is how the world operates in this this fair and just way. But yeah, like we're sitting in class sometimes and it's just like, what the heck is going on? We like see people writing down notes and we know that this isn't how it actually operates whatsoever. And I've gone up to professors who I know are with it, and I'm like, what does this mean? I know this isn't how it operates. But especially like in first year, going to these professors and seeing that they need to be careful with how they speak with you.
And Sky, without mentioning any names, obviously, when you've gone up to those people and said, what's going on, this is not how the real world works, what has been the general response, or the specific response, if you want to quote?
I've gone up to the professors where I know I can like have more of a real conversation, and I feel like a lot of the times like eyes or looks are shared, and it's like, yeah, you're right. And then we'll go more into like what the class is teaching, and the principles. But I think once I left first year, I found that I started having more open conversations with the professors, which, it was really important for me. And just being in classes that there's more room for discussion, and critique, and being honest. Yeah.
What sorts of things do you all do as members of Hard Law? Like what we've talked about, what it's for, why you joined, what a wonderful environment it is. What does the club actually do?
I think there's a good mix of a bunch of different stuff. Like we have different projects with policy within the school. Like last year, there was a student who overdosed and who died. And there's been a decent amount of pushback in trying to change policy, specifically with the Good Samaritan Act as it exists on campus. And pretty much the Good Samaritan Act in Canada is that if somebody overdoses, there's legal protections to people who can help. But on campus, this young girl died and there were people with her and they called for medical help and they were scared to say that drugs were involved. And she died. So a few members have been working on, making letters and having meetings with the council that's been formed to figure out what the school's response is going to be. So that's part of it. And then there's also bringing people in who from like all different areas who could touch harm reduction and decriminalization, and people who have been previously incarcerated, people who are organizers within the city who have a wealth of knowledge that us as law students don't have. Don't have yet. We have, and obviously like we all hold our own knowledge sets but I guess just people who have been doing this work for a while. What else do we do?
Yeah, that was a good one. We do work also with like other organizations, like for the Good Samaritan policy change. We were working with UBC Decrim, which is essentially the UBC law version of hard law, as well as QP 5536, which is QP Union for Harm Reduction Workers. So it's really awesome to be able to work with like other organizations as well and have support in that way. What else does hard law do? We do a lot of like workshops and speaker events where we try to get law students and other students in the school making sure that people are aware of different like issues related to harm reduction, and then workshops such as we are running our second version of a 2-day overdose response training in partnership with AVI. That is naloxone training, but kind of more than that, where we also talk about societal factors and the different limiting factors that might prevent people from actually like using naloxone to help in an overdose situation. Sky and I actually had this is kind of based on a conversation that we had last year with a person who used to be employed through the UVic Harm Reduction Center about the fact that training people and giving people naloxone is really wonderful, but if people who have naloxone and are trained are never going to stop and check on somebody on the street to check that they're okay, then the naloxone training is worthless. So that's something that's been really important to us with the overdose response training, is like making sure that we actually are also including that like context factors as well. And then we have a lot of speaker series where we bring in different people to talk about like harm reduction related things. So we have Shane Calder from the CDPC, which is the Canadian Drug Policy Coalition, coming in a couple weeks. And we also have Rose Williams from the Green Party, who's going to come and talk about the Green Party's platform with regards to harm reduction and kind of more like the politics side. Do you have anything to add about what we do? We do a lot of different things.
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to add that I think one thing that's really important for us as a group is that as much as possible, we get people with lived experience in to teach the students things like overdose response training or to speak to the students and obviously compensate them for their time. But especially because I think in law school, we don't really hear a lot from the people who are affected by the other side of the law. We get to hear from judges and lawyers and those sorts of people. And I do think there's a huge lack in our education of people with lived experience on the other side. So that is something that hard law tries to bring in.
What is your lived experience with these issues, with substance abuse, with substance dependency, or just, maybe you've had friends, family members who've been impacted? Why? I understand why you got involved with hard law because of one of the reasons being the nature of law school and the experience you had in law school. Was there anything that you experienced before that guided you towards harm reduction, guided you towards advocating for people who have less privilege, people who might be more oppressed by the state because of who they are and what they do?
Yeah. In relation to drug use or addiction, I have family members who struggle with addiction. And also my first love struggled quite heavily with addiction. And I feel like it was mainly like through that experience that I learned the realities of living with addiction. And it became something that just very near and dear to my heart. And then I was in Halifax for a good chunk of time. I did my undergrad there and then stayed there afterwards for a bit, but started getting more involved into activism, I guess, and organizing and marshalling. And that really opened my eyes to how the state functions, and wanted to get involved just like, and I think it was like through many experiences, realized I wanted to get into law, because that's where I saw it myself being most beneficial, or at least having a legal knowledge is something that I really wanted. And then once I made that decision, realized I wanted more experience, or just like life experience, and wanted to work with people who I wanted to be helping, I guess. So then started working at the supportive housing site. And I feel like that just uncovered like a whole other layer to life that I hadn't had my eyes fully open to. Yeah, so a bunch of things, but that's the gist.
Jesse or Sophie?
Yeah, I think kind of similar to Sky in that there's just like kind of a lot of different things that drew me into hard law specifically. I have people in my life who have had like shitty experiences with drugs, and also just a lot of people in my life who are people who use drugs. I feel like as the contaminated drug crisis continues, I find it hard to believe that there's people who are not impacted by this, to be honest. In some way, I think that it really is something that people don't really talk about very much. But I think that more people are impacted than they realize. And then, yeah, just coming to law school, I knew that I wanted to be learning about ways of like making a difference and helping people. I think of harm reduction in like a lot of ways. I think that harm reduction like has to do specifically with drugs, but it also has to do with a lot of the kind of external factors, almost like housing and food access and like all of essentially like the things that people need to live. And all of those things and access to all of those things are really important to me. So it just kind of made sense.
Also, just to add on to that, I sound like one of those people in class. I never wanted to be that person. Sorry. Just building on what Jesse's saying. I do think harm reduction actually, correct me if I'm wrong on this, originated, I just want to put this out there, that it originated actually with like HIV work and
That's
people
true.
working with the HIV and AIDS crisis. So I just want to give that credit where credit is due. But yeah, ours is definitely, our club is more focused around like decriminalization and harm reduction around drugs. And I think for me, I actually didn't know a lot specifically about harm reduction and decriminalization and prohibition And all of these things going into law school, I had these ideas of, I have people in my life who use drugs. I use drugs. I have people in my life who struggle with addiction. And having that feeling of, why are we punishing people for this, but not having a very concrete idea of the reality of it. So I think that hard law started for me as a safe space within the law school and a place to learn about these things that I care about, and has really given me that opportunity to learn so much more and so much about how, really, like Jesse said, it's not just about drugs, it's about everything. It's about how our society is structured, because
It's all connected.
at the end of the day, drugs are criminalized again because that benefits some people, and the people that it harms aren't the people that the people who make the law think matter. And I think that that is the case for just about everything. So yeah, that's what I would say hard law has been for me.
Sky, you said this explicitly, and both Sophie and Jesse, you also sort of included it in your comments, but why do you think there is such a fundamental disconnect between the way that law is taught and the way that it is lived? Because, being somebody who teaches law, I agree with you, Sky, 100%. And yet we continue to insist on teaching future lawyers in this way that does not reflect the reality of what actually happens in courtrooms, how people are arrested, how people are sentenced. To your point, Sophie, who's arrested, who's sentenced, what do they look like, what populations they come from. And I'm curious about your opinions as to why we continue to have this tremendous disconnect.
I feel like there's disconnect in every sphere of life.
Well, that's
like truly, and I think the law school invites a certain kind of person, or at least for the most part, people who have been told that the law is a place for them, or law school is a place for them, and it feels like it intentionally leaves people out who weren't raised amongst lawyers, or people who are sitting in a place where they knew lawyers out, and just like the prestige that follows it. And I think for people who don't fit into that category, they find themselves attracted to law school in roundabout ways, or maybe there's this like gnawing at them where it's like, okay, eventually, like, I gotta go, I gotta do this. But that the law as it's been made and as it's been implemented and continues to be, it's not by the people who aren't supposed to be there. And I think it's a hard thing to question. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think that the disconnect exists because it's supposed to. Like, it's a purposeful disconnect. And I want to say something that I feel like is maybe a little...
Say it.
I feel like some people are allowed to break the law and some people are not allowed to break the law, is what it really is. It's not even that some people
Sorry,
don't break
Jesse,
the law.
who is allowed to break the law and who's not allowed to break the law?
People who are allowed to break the law are people who have money, people who have property, people who have white skin, and people who understand the law. Like Sky was saying. Or who can afford the people who can understand the law, exactly. It's a system that's so set up to impact certain people, and it's people who are poor, people who are visible outside, people who don't have a place to go to do their illegal things, and so they're doing it outside. It really is everyone is doing the same things, and some people are getting punished for them, and some people are not getting punished for them.
I also think that that disconnect exists because it's easy and comfortable for the people who teach the law. Because to teach the law means you work in the law, and to work in the law means that you are a part of it as much as...
And sorry to interrupt. And it also means that you have to believe in the law. To teach the law, you got to believe in what you're teaching.
Absolutely. And I think that it is easier and more comfortable for people to teach the law as though it is a objective and just thing, that if anything unjust happens under the law, that's not a symptom of the law, it's an aberration. I hope I used that right. And I think that frighteningly almost, it's almost more scary to me than like an evil intent, is this actual belief that it's good. And I think that's where some of the disconnect comes. And I had a practicing criminal lawyer, come into one of my classes the other day and say, little plug to be a Crown lawyer. We are fair and impartial, and we get to go home every day knowing that we've done good. And also later said about someone who was an accused person who this Crown lawyer said had lied on the stand, said, and I know that they were lying because they were convicted. And I just wanted to share that because that's actually how people working in this system think. And I think that that kind of like thoughtless righteousness is terrifying.
That kind of reminds me also of the three of us were actually in a class with Joel last semester. And that reminds me of when we had a judge who came in to talk to us, and I asked him, what was I asking him? I essentially asked him like if he thinks that like the law is right. Like, does he think that like if something is against the law, it's because it's like a bad thing or like morally wrong? And he said yes, he does believe that like the law is right, and that if something is against the law, then it's wrong. And I think that that's a very like common conflation of legality and morality, which like makes me laugh because I it's so if you like are looking for it, you can so easily spot the ways that those things are different. But I think that we're taught, like as a society, to conflate these things, to believe that legality is equal to morality, and therefore if something is illegal, it is immoral, or if something is legal, then it's okay. And that's really why we think, like, okay, so you were convicted and so you did the wrong thing, like you were a morally bad person or whatever. And it's so much more complicated than that. And trying to simplify it into these like yes or no, good and bad, is just, it leaves people to fall through the cracks.
It reminds me of the first thing we talked about in class, which is the differences between law and justice, and how, in my experience, both in the legal field, but also in the larger, civilian world, those are so often assumed to be the same thing. If it's legal, the outcome of the legal system is going to be just. Whatever the system spits out, that's the just verdict, or that's the just outcome. And if that's not what the system spat out, it's because that would have been unjust otherwise. And I find that assumption just everywhere, and it's so intrinsic to the system, and in my experience, so often wrong.
Yeah, it's like a double speak happening for the phrase criminal justice system. Like we say it and everyone says it, and it just like, it's imputing in our brain that there are criminals and people who are inherently criminal, which isn't true, and that the system is just, and it is like the epitome of justice. And I think going back to your question about why the law school teaches this way, I think these ideas were taught them in the law school, and were taught them in everyday life, in our entire lives growing up. And some people have experiences that then teach them that that's not the case. But for the for the majority of people who are sitting in law school, what they're being taught affirms this belief that they have and their experiences that they've had, and they haven't had to experience what life is like outside of the law being just or the two equaling one another. And there are few people where, they know that that's not the case. And yeah, that's not most of the people who are in law school.
And I think that kind of also connects to what you were saying earlier. Oh my gosh, and now I'm forgetting the train of my thought. About law school being a gate, not a bridge, where certain people can be let in to learn about it. And it's not the people who have experiences that inform them that law, the way that it's taught in law school, is different than the way that it is experienced in the real world. People who already know that, like, the law school admissions process is there to keep them out. The LSAT is there to keep them out. And then if you do happen to get in, the law school experience is not a comfortable or safe one that like makes you feel good for being there. I literally I spent all of my first year of law school feeling like I was losing my mind because you're basically just being gaslit all the time. And I literally had to drop to part-time school because I was like, I'm losing my mind.
Why did you persevere, Jessie?
Because I didn't want to be a quitter. And because there are honestly probably 90% because of hard law. Because you do find your people, and if you're lucky enough to find like really good people, then which I have been definitely, you can kind of hold on to each other and like affirm that nope, you're not losing it. Things are actually just this wild. And that's comforting, sort of.
Yeah, no, I feel so fortunate for hard law. And I mean, I say hard law, but it's really like my friends.
In the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Super. But I think also the last class marking like being halfway done law school, we were in the seminar class called Green Legal Theory. And in the final class, we were talking about a constitutional doctrine called Honor of the Crown. And it's pretty much, I don't know, in first year of constitutional, the second half is talking about Section 35, which is Indigenous rights. And the entire time, you're hearing and learning about these things that don't make sense. And it feels like they're made out of fairy dust. And people are just bringing these different ideas into existence pretty much to legitimize Indigenous people's place in Canada, or more so legitimize Canada. And we were having a conversation in this class, and we were all just having a very open, honest conversation and critiquing how things were. But we all understood the law, and we were able to have a conversation about the law where we were maybe saying like these phrases or talking about cases. And I think just being in that class and being able to have a conversation about the law where everyone was like, I understood what we were saying, but also able to say what was wrong with it and why it didn't make sense. And the class was full of super like smarties everywhere. And it was amazing. And I was like, this is why I came to law school, because I wanted to understand it and understand why it didn't make sense, and then be able to articulate why it didn't make sense, and pretty much to be able to use the language of people I disagree with so strongly and be able to like stand my ground and be like, it doesn't make sense. And I understand why it doesn't make sense. And it no longer feels like it doesn't make sense. Well, it feels, but like I have the language to articulate it. And there's so much power in that. And I'd say that's why I'm at law school, like for that, which is really special and makes it worth it.
So as we draw to a close, I wanted to ask the three of you about an experience that all four of us have had recently that I think we sort of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we categorize in much the same way, is going to Williams Head Federal Prison, which is a minimum security federal prison on the island. And we were there last week, and then you all have been there before. And this is a place where people, it's all men, the men who live there are, many of them serving life sentences, some of them serving life sentences for homicide, for murder. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all four of us go and come back and return because it's such an invigorating experience. And it really is, for me at least, one of the highlights of my week and my month is getting to go to that prison and spend time in community with those guys. And we tell civilians that, and like, what are you talking about? The highlight of your week was going to a prison and spending time with convicted murderers. And I would love for you to maybe explain to people who are listening why that is such a special experience for us and for you in particular. And why is it that that experience, among all the experiences we could have and you could have as law students, actually can be really invigorating and really positive?
I think for me, it can be difficult to stay hopeful or optimistic. But going to William Head and talking with some of the guys, or at least all of the ones that come and hang out with us and spend time with us, they are so optimistic. It is crazy. Like the way that they speak about things and having hope and wanting to do work that betters themselves and the community and the carceral system, and how they have hope after they've been freaking beat down. And yeah, I just, it's like, well, if they've got hope, then I sure as heck am gonna have hope. And I think the connections that we make there, like truly all of the guys that I've spoken to, they're such amazing people and very like kind souls. And yeah, I think just being able to spend time with them, it reminds me that, I don't know, staying optimistic, staying humble. Yeah.
Yeah, I think very similar. It's very like inspiring to be around people who, yeah, like the system has basically taken away all of your freedoms, and yet you are still here talking to us and telling us about your experiences, and yeah, being hopeful. It's really something. I also find it very invigorating, I guess would maybe be the word, in that I leave in a really pissed off mood at system, like the system that the carceral system, I guess. And just I think that prison is really a place where you can see very clearly that the law as it's written does not exist there.
Is it fair to say that prison is one of the few places left in society that really magnifies the contradictions? I mean,
I think
there's so
really
many
does.
there's so many places we can go where the contradictions are hidden.
Mhm.
And prisons and jails and the carceral system, you can't hide it. The contradictions are in your face from the moment you set foot on the premises.
Yeah, I think so. And just like talking to people and hearing, honestly, like talking about the law around what like prisoners' rights are and whatnot, and like seeing people laugh at what the law says, and just like hearing about people's experiences. Yeah, it's a place where it's very, very obvious. And I think that it's because, like, yeah, people are not free to leave. They don't have another option. There isn't really like a system of recourse unless you want to talk to exactly the people who are subjecting you to these harms, which is true of the justice system in general. But really, once you're in there, there's not very much that can happen. And also, just learning how small the community around prison law is, and that there's not that many people working in this area, which makes your options for recourse even smaller. Yeah, I don't know. I find when I get pissed off, it's kind of something good a lot of the time because it means that I'm like feeling passionate. So being pissed off when I leave is not a bad thing, I guess.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that it is an incredible experience getting to spend time with the guys at William Head and who are so awesome and funny and kind and smart and who are treated as who are just obviously, well, I don't know if it's obvious. They're treated even in that prison, which is a really good one comparatively.
Good.
Just not treated as people who matter in any way. And so it's invigorating, but it's also really sad. And the way that they are grateful to have us there is also wonderful, but also really sad because no one should feel that grateful to be treated like a person for a day and a half. And so I think that, like Sky said, I keep going with law because it's such an incredible privilege to be able to articulate exactly what you have a problem with and why it doesn't make sense. But also it's an incredible privilege, the thought of being able to be there for someone who is in their very worst moment of their life and treat them with empathy and respect and hopefully help them. And I really do believe that every person deserves that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Final thought, final question. If somebody's listening to this and they want to get into harm reduction, or even if they want to go to law school and do social justice work instead of just making rich people richer, what do you say to them to encourage them? What do you say to them to keep them on the path of justice and solidarity and revolution for the people?
If possible, make sure that you are surrounded by people who feel the same way, because that has been the biggest gift for me, has been the people that I've met in law school who feel the same way. And I feel like all three of you have been such wonderful teachers to me. And I've learned so much from all three of you. And having people who you can be there for when they're struggling with it, with the hopelessness or frustration or anger, and then who are also there for you in return, and being able to even just look at someone in class and be like, that's crazy, right? Like, that's wild what just happened. Like, that is such a gift and a lifeline. Honestly, that would be my biggest piece of advice, is find your people and clutch them.
I think that my biggest piece of advice would be to remember that there are a lot of ways that you can be involved and a lot of ways that you can make a difference in people's lives. I think that especially within the harm reduction community, getting burnt out is very, very common. And I think that remembering that there's a lot of different things that you can do. And if something like isn't working for you, then you can pivot and do something different. And just remembering to also take care of yourself is really, really important. I feel like people can get lost in that. But you're not really helpful to the cause if you're burnt out. So making sure to prioritize things, I think, is really important.
I have no idea what to say. I feel like I'm coming back to heart and love, and that there's so much love in this work. And I see it as like a full embodiment of that, and the love that you get from being around people who, I don't know, who see things similarly, or then who get to see you as you are, and the love that comes from like the clients or residents or people in prison, and that there's a lot of heartache, but there's also so much love. And luckily, I get to feel the love more than the heartache. Yeah, it's a full heart, I'd say.
Well, as somebody who's been working in this space for a long time, I just want to personally thank all three of you for how hard you work and what you've chosen to dedicate your time to. It's very, very rare that such wonderfully talented and smart people make that decision. And I'm just really proud of all three of you. So Sophie and Jesse and Sky, thank you very much for being on Seeds of Revolution. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
If Jesus Christ came back today like you threaten he will, which poor group of people do you think that he would kill? And who would Jesus choose to starve if you gave him the chance? And if there was a genocide, would he take a neutral stance? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would he say it's complicated and there's sinners on both sides? Or would he say that some people, they just deserve to die? If Jesus Christ rose from the dead and on a sidewalk slept, would you extend your hand to him or just watch where you stepped? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus hate the gay folk, the queer folk, or the trans? Would he suggest they end their lives according to God's plans? Would Jesus tell a homeless man to get a fucking job, or turn his back on the poor? Would Jesus be a snob? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus build a border wall? Would Jesus drive a tank? Would Jesus be a landlord? Would Jesus run a bank? Would Jesus Christ feel safe in his skin if he came to your town? And would you still believe in him if you found out he was brown? Who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? Yeah, who would Jesus bomb? Tell me, who would Jesus bomb? Would it be kids in Palestine, or how about Vietnam? Would Jesus bomb the atheists, the Muslims, or the Jews? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well, what would Jesus do? I want you to ask yourself, well,